England, 1736. Along the banks of the River Thames, an 11-year-old boy named John went to work on a cargo ship with his dad. It was a welcome departure from his otherwise grim childhood. After his mother died when he was only 6, John was neglected for years by his stepmother and abused by the older boys at his boarding school. But that day, he felt free as he helped his dad untie the rigging and hoist the sails before walking the length of the ship, taking inventory of the freight. As with most of his father's shipments, the payload that day included newly purchased African slaves who were being shipped to plantations in the Caribbean. John continued working on slave ships throughout his adolescence. He renounced all belief in God at age 16, and 2 years later, during a trip across the Atlantic, John's ship was seized by the British Royal Navy, and he was forced into military service. He grew more rebellious and obstinate with each year of service in the Navy. In his 20s, John hit rock bottom when he himself was sold into slavery in Sierra Leone. He was a slave for 3 years before some of his father's friends came to the rescue by smuggling him onto a ship bound for England. While at sea, a menacing squall engulfed their vessel in the dark of night. The ship's captain was thrown overboard, never to be seen again. Hoping to avoid the same fate, John tied himself and a shipmate to a post in the hull, saying, "If this will not work, then Lord have mercy on us." 11 hours later, the storm was over and John was still alive. His own words, "Lord have mercy on us," stuck with him forever. He continued shipping slaves for a few years after that, but by the time he turned 30, he could no longer stomach the slave trade. He became an influential voice in the abolitionist movement, and at the age of 41, he was ordained by the Anglican Church. 6 years later, he sat in a prayer meeting, still feeling burdened by the painful memories of his past, his dying mother, the neglect and abuse of his childhood, the faces of all those human beings he counted as inventory, and all the ways he'd been a disappointment to his fellow man, to his wife, to his father, and to God. In spite of it all, in that moment he was overcome by an unshakable sense of peace. And that night, John Newton wrote the words to the world's most famous hymn.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Today on Maybe God, our first ever interview with a music legend, a Hall of Famer whose unmatched success and unexpected survival could only have happened by grace. Amazing grace.
I'm indifferent.
I believe in God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
You know, where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God.
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
He could never love me after this.
God is still good.
You're listening to Maybe God. I'm Eric Huffman. A few weeks ago, the Maybe God team, including my wife, Giovanna, and I, drove 5 hours north to a tiny town outside of Dallas to meet a man I've idolized since I was a kid. When I was growing up in the backwoods of Northeast Texas, country music was everything. Most of my friends fell into one of two camps, George Strait fans or Garth Brooks fans, but I was always a Randy Travis man. I once took home the third place ribbon in a Texarkana talent show by singing his hit song, Forever and Ever Amen. The man is a legend, a 7-time Grammy winner and a country music Hall of Famer who has sold over 25 million records thanks to his iconic baritone voice. My heart was racing and my stomach was in knots as we entered the gate and drove up the winding path through his 325-acre ranch toward the imposing 2-story country house at the top of the hill. Randy and his wife, Mary, have lived on this ranch for about a decade. They've only been married since 2015, but they've known each other for more than 20 years. And during that time, they've experienced a lifetime of joy and heartache together. Wow, hello there. What an honor to meet you, Mr. Travis. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. The inside of the Travis home feels like a country boy's fever dream. Everything inside is made of leather and wood. Antlers and cowboy hats and antique guns decorate the walls, while an old pool table and a life-size cardboard cutout of Randy Travis himself tie the room together. There's also a wet bar featuring an extensive collection of the finest whiskeys, but I noticed that all the bottles were completely empty. The ranch was teeming with life. There were animals everywhere. From the very beginning, it was clear who ran the show at the Travis residence. Who are these three?
Oh, this is our son's dog.
Yeah.
And these two little scraggly looking things, they need grooming.
We all do at this time, COVID-19.
Yeah.
COVID-19 dogs.
Yeah, those are Randy's lap sitters.
That's good. That's good therapy. Even some of Randy's biggest fans are unaware that ever since he suffered a massive stroke in 2013 that paralyzed the right side of his body, the country legend has been confined to a wheelchair and unable to sing or speak more than a word or two at a time. I knew about his limitations before we met, but I admit it was still a shock to see the great Randy Travis in that condition. But Randy's got a smile that communicates more than words ever could. And every time his 2 Yorkies jumped up on his lap, his expression lit up the room. A little later, we hopped inside an all-terrain vehicle for a quick tour of the ranch. Away we go. How many acres do you have here, Mary?
325.
Oh, wow.
After a 45-minute tour of the farm, we headed inside to the Randy Travis Trophy Room. And my head was spinning as I took my first ever look at an international superstar's collection of awards and accolades.
The phone rings twice, and then it's through. I don't even have to answer. I know it's you.
As the crew finished setting up for the interview, I read the inscriptions on Randy Travis's 7 Grammys, as well as his personal notes that he'd received over the years from the likes of Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Dolly Parton, and Carrie Underwood. And that's when it hit me. I was about to interview Randy Travis. And I wasn't planning on lobbing a bunch of softballs either. My plan was to ask him about all the toughest and most embarrassing moments of his life and career. I felt more than a little nervous as we sat down to get started. Randy, I was telling Mary in the kitchen earlier just what an honor it is to be here with you. It's a little awkward even to talk about growing up just idolizing you in East Texas, listening to country music, and to you in particular, and that low voice that's so distinctive. And it didn't even, if you'd never heard a song before, you heard Randy sing and you knew it was Randy.
Thank you.
It's a real honor. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how y'all met, a little bit about your love story.
We, in 1990, we first met.
Yeah.
I was working with my brother's shirt company called Stubbs Collection.
All right.
And Randy was wearing the shirts. He had gotten them in Nashville.
Yeah.
So when he would come through Dallas, they would come by the office. That's where we first met. And so in 2009, my home burned down where we were raising our kids.
Oh, no.
From a lightning strike.
Yeah.
And, all of the things that were wrong with my marriage at the time were starting to fester and come to light. And so we split up, and Randy was going through the same thing, and we didn't know that about each other.
Yeah.
So in March of 2010, when our paths crossed.
How did your paths cross again?
Well, we ran into each other actually over at Billy Bob's, and he didn't go on until 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just didn't look the same as I'd seen him over the years.
What did you see that was different?
His stage presence, number one. He just wasn't the Randy Travis that I'd seen on the stage. There were not the jokes, the fun stuff, no life in his face.
Yeah.
And his wife wasn't with him, and that was really strange because we had never seen him without her over the years.
Sure.
So the next day I called out to their place in Santa Fe, and he answered the phone, which he never does.
Yeah.
And we just started talking, and he found out he was going through what he was, and I was going through what I was. And he said, well, I'm going through Shawnee, Oklahoma on the 10th. You want to come up and we'll go to lunch?
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it was a sweet day.
Yeah.
You know, and thereafter.
Yeah. So, Randy, you're from Marshville, North Carolina, the son of, let's see, you had 6 kids in that house. You were the second.
Yeah.
And the son of a turkey farmer?
He was a rancher, kind of home builder. He was multi-talented in that aspect. And he also was a horse trainer, so he always had horses.
Yeah.
And Randy would often say that his daddy was the best horse trainer he'd ever met, and indeed he was.
All 6 kids in Randy's family had their own horse by the time they turned 5. Randy's dad, Harold, loved traditional country music too, and so he always made sure that Randy had a horse under his butt and a guitar in his hand.
All 6 of them played an instrument.
Really?
And when he went to Miss Kate, when he was 9 and Ricky was 10, they were going to take guitar lessons. But his dad said, well, one of you has to sing. And Ricky said, well, I'm not singing. And he was the oldest one, so he got to pick. So then Miss Kate said, well, Randy, you got to sing then.
And that was the start.
He opened his mouth to start singing. She says, I think we got something here.
Randy and his older brother, Ricky, started touring by the time Randy was 9. They were called the Trawick Brothers. That was the family's last name. Ricky and Randy became regular performers, playing at talent shows, school events, even local honky-tonks and bars. Harold bought them matching outfits, white pants, a red shirt, and a red neckerchief. So coming from that world, did it ever cross your mind as a young man that you would become Randy Travis, the country music Hall of Famer, the 7-time Grammy winner? Did anybody see that coming?
No.
Wow. Randy, did you grow up going to church with your family? A little bit?
Yeah.
Maybe Christmas and Easter?
Yeah.
No, his mama was very faithful.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was a sweet, sweet lady, soft-mannered, soft-tempered. And Randy would tell me, he said, Mama would get up and go to church, and it was usually by herself. And he said, and I was too much of a rebel, and Dad wasn't interested in it.
Yeah. At that point,
it's like pray for the fish when Harold went to church, right? And so
pray for the fish.
Pray for the fish.
Yeah.
So Mama was kind of the one. He goes, and I always watched her, and I always knew that's where I needed to be.
Yeah.
But as the young rebel that I was, I didn't act on that. But I think just her living that life, she was that Bible that he was reading. It just hadn't sunk in yet.
The word is, from other interviews that you've done, the feeling is that the relationship with your father was a little complicated at times.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Would you say that he was, when you were a kid, that he was abusive? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Physically?
Yeah.
Yeah. Later in life, I'm just curious if he ever came back and apologized to you or said, I'm sorry, or...
No.
Did you ever forgive him?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yeah, his dad he had an alcohol problem. And when Randy said some days they never knew when he was going to come home drunk. He said when he was nice, he was so sweet, so nice, and when he was drinking, he was terrible.
Yeah.
He did get violent. You know, one time he was getting violent with Randy's mom. And Randy, I think, was about 9, 10, 11 years old, and went and pulled him off his mama, which made his daddy mad.
Yeah.
And so Randy, he ran out of the house and down the road and into a corn patch, and he said he stayed there for 3 days.
3 days?
To wait for his dad to kind of cool off.
Scared to go home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Randy's 2019 memoir, Forever and Ever Amen, he describes the abuse that he and Ricky suffered as children. They were often beaten with leather horse reins, and Harold screamed obscenities at them for the smallest things. Their dad's behavior wasn't a family secret. He also had a reputation in town as a rebel, ready to fight at the drop of a hat. And he had a long rap sheet with the local police. Most of the time, the only thing Harold and Randy could agree on was their love for traditional country music. Did you ever doubt that your dad loved you?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's normal in an abusive situation.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that would shape you as a young man. Growing up, even as a teenager, I've heard you had some struggles as a teenager.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
So in your teenage years, did you start drinking in that time?
Yeah.
Would that become a problem for you pretty early in life? That get you in trouble?
No.
No, you got in trouble sober
Yeah.
back in those days.
No, I did it all by myself.
I like the honesty, Randy.
My friend Jen didn't have anything to do with it. That's funny. Never been asked that.
Great. At an early age, Randy started getting into a lot of trouble, like his daddy, drinking and smoking cigarettes by the time he was 10. He skipped school a lot, too, and dropped out at the end of middle school. He and Ricky were considered juvenile delinquents by the local police. Randy was arrested for public drunkenness, DWI, and attempting to elude an officer. In the mid-70s, Ricky and Randy were arrested for trying to steal a van. In the weeks prior to their scheduled court appearances, they entered a musical talent contest at Country City, USA, a club owned and operated by husband and wife Frank and Lib Hatcher. The Trawick brothers were up against more than 100 other musical acts.
And they won the first competition, and they were going to the next one, and Ricky dropped out, so Randy went solo.
Wow.
And he ended up winning that competition.
Randy was 16 years old when he won that competition, and Lib was so taken with his voice that she offered him a job as a dishwasher and a part-time cook, with the added perk of being able to sing once in a while. While Randy worked for Lib, he opened up to her about his upcoming court date and the likelihood that he'd soon be leaving for prison. But Lib showed up in court and convinced the judge to give Randy one last chance. She promised that she'd keep him on the straight and narrow, working at her club. The judge agreed to 5 years probation, and Lib kept her promise. She got Randy away from the bottle and his life of petty crime. When Randy was 17, things started heating up with Lib. Eventually, she divorced her husband and brought Randy to Nashville to get his career off the ground. She was 18 years his senior. Did you take off right away in Nashville, or did it take a while?
No.
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 It's a struggle for a while?
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Were
didn't come
you-
easy. He worked for it. It was a good 10 long years of, know your two country from all the labels. He paid his dues, but I think that's healthy.
In Nashville, Randy was no stranger to rejection. He was turned away by every major label in town for being too country. A few years prior, country hits began to sound a lot like radio-friendly pop music. So for years, Randy worked as a fry cook at the Nashville Palace, another honky-tonk where several country legends had gotten their start. And sometimes he would even
Throw his jacket on and he'd get up there and sing a couple of songs.
Yeah.
So, and the Nashville Palace was right across the street from where the Grand Ole Opry was.
Yeah.
And so they had a lot of residual visits from people that were at the Grand Ole Opry,
Sure.
including little Jimmy Dickens.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he came and heard him one night. And he says, "Son, I want you to come over to the Opry with me tonight."
Yeah.
And
Are
Randy
you
did,
kidding?
and he was. Randy thought that he was just going to have him, in the wings watching and just being at the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
But when they got there, Jimmy said, "No, you're going out there to sing in my place," And Randy said, "I was so nervous." But
Did it go well?
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought you were going to say no. I was like, I think it went pretty good.
Yeah.
Was that Was that sort of the next turning point in your career?
I think so.
You got some people's attention?
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful to see a country boy do great? Doing something he does better than anybody else, and that's singing great country songs. Here's the greatest one of our time, ladies and gentlemen, Randy Travis.
At just 27 years old, Randy was the youngest male artist to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. And on February 14th, 1985, he inked his first record deal with Warner Brothers Records. By the next year, he was celebrating his first #1 hit single, On the Other Hand. At 27, is God anywhere on your radar at that point?
No.
Not really?
No.
Yeah. You didn't find yourself praying, or even when you were struggling, would you ask him for help or anything like that?
No.
Not so much. Yeah. You were doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Making your own way.
Yeah.
And you made it.
Hey, Randy, do you think that you played a major part in bringing the old school and the new breed of country music together?
Well, I guess I was part of it. I was just in the right place at the right time. You know, I was in Nashville and working at a place, and I had been turned down by every label in Nashville, trying to get signed as an artist, and reason being there wasn't a place for what I was doing, and being just traditional country music.
So when you make it as a 27-year-old hotshot from a small town in North Carolina, suddenly you've got fame. I don't know how the fortune part works, if that came right away or later, but you've definitely got some wind in your sails. How does that affect you?
He kept his.
Yeah.
I think Randy was known to be. He was full of humility.
Yeah.
Randy
Really?
was never the hot shot.
Yeah.
If you ever see any of his interviews, he was always the little shy kid that, that just scoots his feet around going, I don't know what happened. He was always that.
You know, I don't know if you remember, we were talking the other day with some people here, but do you remember the first time that I met you?
No.
I did your morning show, and I was like probably 17 years old at the time, and I remember going in, and you came in, and I remember when you came up to speak to me, but you didn't say hello. You came in and you said, "You any good?" And that's quite an introduction. Of course, like I said, I was 17 years old, and I just said, well, some good, and didn't really know what to say. Scared me.
He was never full of himself. He never forgot where he came from. He was always kind.
Yeah.
And with his fame, he was never, he never took it for granted.
Yep.
And he always said, I don't know what I did to deserve this. So I think that there was God hovering over him and just waiting to pour out some more abundantly.
That's right. Waiting for him to see.
Yeah.
Randy released one hit after another for almost 2 decades. In 1990, he was declared the king of country music by major media outlets. With a pitch-perfect blend of classic country heartache and lyrics that were both wholesome and witty, Randy's songs provided more than mere entertainment. They spoke to the listener's soul.
We've had one of his fans, became a fan, but this little kid that he was, I guess, down in the bottom and was going to commit suicide, and had the gun with him. He was heading down to the lake, dirt road, the whole 9 yards, wrote a suicide letter. And one of Randy's songs came on, and he said, I stopped the car, and I cried. And he said, and I listened to the song again, and he said, and it spoke to me, and everything I needed to hear. I went back, and now I'm married, have 3 beautiful kids.
Yep.
Wow.
It's just in a song, in a moment, and
That is powerful.
It is. It's wonderful. I mean, and we get to hear those stories. That's what's even more wonderful.
That is amazing. What an impact you've made, Randy.
It's pretty
Thank
special.
you.
Are you proud of your legacy and the impact you've made in country music?
Yeah.
And he always said, if I can change one heart, lighten one load, or take away one bad day for someone, I've done my job.
Yeah.
And that's the way you've certainly done that a few times over.
More than a few.
Oh Lord, my God, when I'm in awesome wonder, consider all the worlds thy hands have made.
In 1991, as his career continued to skyrocket, Randy decided to get baptized. Before that time, he had never really considered himself a Christian. But as he looked back on his life, he could no longer deny how God's grace had been there, protecting him ever since he was a kid. From that time on, Randy started reading his Bible every day, learning more about this God who had never given up on him. In 2003, Randy recorded a song about 4 very different people: a farmer, a teacher, a preacher, and a hooker, who were riding in the same bus when it crashed, and 3 of them were killed. Only the hooker survived, and just before the preacher took his final breath, he placed his Bible in her hands. The person telling the story in 3 wooden crosses is that woman's son, who grew up to become a preacher, all because his mother became a believer on the night of that fiery crash. 3 Wooden Crosses was the first Christian song ever to top the country music charts. In some ways, that song also reflects the total transformation that had taken place in Randy's heart. In all, Randy released 4 gospel albums, each of which landed in Billboard's top 10 country charts. His rendition of How Great Thou Art on the album called Worship and Faith is so beautiful, it's almost as if the 150-year-old hymn was written specifically for Randy's deep voice.
How great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art, how great thou art.
You were a grown man. That was a choice you made.
Yeah.
Did you feel God calling you to do that?
Yeah.
You thought it was time?
Yeah.
Till the day he couldn't read anymore after the stroke, he would read the Bible
Yeah.
every morning, usually over some fruit and his protein shake and the Bible.
Yeah. You know, being in ministry, you see people who make a decision like that, get baptized, they decide to follow Jesus. And I think some of them feel like, well, now my life's going to get easier.
Mm-mm.
And most often it doesn't. And that can be really demoralizing for somebody to say, I came to you, Jesus, and things just got worse. And so after 2001, I guess you had some tough years down the road, right, after that. At any point along the way, have you said, why, God? Like, are you there?
No.
You have not?
Mm.
You've never doubted his presence with you?
No.
Through it all?
Mm.
Have you struggled at all to make sense of the struggle?
Yeah.
Just the trying to figure out what God is doing here. So your doubts weren't, are you there, God? You didn't doubt God's presence or his goodness. You just tried to figure out where his goodness was
Yeah.
in the midst of all the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, that people think, well, if I turn my life over to God, then everything's going to be perfect and it's all just going to be a ribbon of highway. God never promised us that.
That's right.
And he told us there'd be tough days. And the closer we get to him, the harder the devil has to work. And he shows up often.
The same year Randy was baptized, he married Lib Hatcher, the woman who'd started off as his legal guardian when he was 17 and who was largely responsible for getting his career off the ground in Nashville. Randy was 32 at the time. Lib was 50. In his memoir, Randy describes Lib as a controlling force in his life. She managed everything from his career to his social life. She wouldn't even let him have his own cell phone or make his own decisions. But she was also the one who kept Randy away from drugs and alcohol during the height of his career. In 2009, the marriage took a turn when Lib apparently took an interest in another man, a young artist who moved in with the couple and then started touring with them and eventually began singing with Randy at some of his concerts. It sent their marriage into turmoil, and as Lib turned her attention away from Randy, he turned his attention toward the bottle again. After decades of sobriety, he was 51 years old.
How bad did your struggle with the bottle get?
Bad.
Bad?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a dark time of your life.
Yeah.
When you look back on that time now, do you see God's hand?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Even through the struggle?
Yeah.
I guess even in bringing y'all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that something, how he works?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, when we least expect it,
Yeah.
you know, but he's there.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it is when we go through difficult times. And if you have a challenge or something and you don't know what to do with it, then life is like a staircase. You got to take the first step. You got to keep taking
It's the hardest
steps,
one to take.
you know, onward and upward.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll get to the top, and that's when you gain your understanding. And now I get it. And that's by the grace of God.
Mary and Randy reconnected in 2010. That was the year that Randy's divorce to Lib was finally settled. But she continued to manage his career after that. Randy and Mary moved onto this ranch in Tioga, Texas, and Randy lived with more freedom than he'd had in 33 years. He had his own cell phone. He spent time with his friends, and even drank occasionally, although in moderation. But Randy's working relationship with Lib continued to deteriorate, culminating in a messy legal fight in 2012. And that's the year the world witnessed Randy Travis at one of his darkest moments.
Randy Travis was arrested for DUI after he crashed his Trans Am near Tioga in August of 2012. Troopers say a blood alcohol sample showed he was twice the legal limit.
On August 6th, Randy and Mary had recently returned from Norway, where Randy sang at a festival. After drinking 2 glasses of wine with some friends who'd come over for dinner, he headed to bed and took some Ambien to help him sleep. At some point during the night, he woke up and went downstairs to pour himself a drink, and then he hopped into his car to go buy cigarettes at the local store. He was naked when he arrived at the store, and he asked the clerk for cigarettes. On the way home, empty-handed since he didn't have his wallet, he lost control of the car and careened into a construction barricade. His head flew forward into the windshield. He crawled away from the crash, onto the road where, completely naked and bleeding from his head, Randy lost consciousness. When the Tioga Volunteer Fire Department arrived, they determined that Randy was dead on arrival, until he got up and started walking down the road. That's when the police arrived and caught the most embarrassing moment of Randy's life on their dashboard cam. Randy was arrested for DWI. Mary paid the $21,500 bail that was set by the judge, and she took Randy home. As they drove up to the ranch, the road was lined with dozens of media vans, and helicopters circled overhead.
So 2012 was obviously kind of it was a dark moment with the arrest and all that stuff. And I see people in ministry, both pastors and people I'm ministering to, dealing with sort of the cancel culture world we're in now, and people, the shaming that people do online, and how everybody's worst moment lives forever now.
Yeah.
Did that make it harder to move on from that moment in your life, knowing that people just won't let you forget it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
you wish you could have that one back.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, yeah.
And now it's out there, and it can be such a graceless world sometimes.
It's very unfortunate because I think that we are measured by the way we measure others.
Yeah.
That's part of the Luke 6:38 that he loves so much.
Yeah.
But I don't think people understand that that's really the way it is when we get to where we're hoping to go and we're having to answer some questions. And why would we expect somebody else's perfection when we're so imperfect ourselves?
Yeah. How did you react to the news of Randy's arrest, and then how did you love him through that?
Well, there wasn't anything that was going to make me fall out of love with him. But they called about 4 a.m. from the sheriff's department, and they told me that they had him there. And it just broke my heart. But, of course, you've got 1,000 things going through your mind. You're not sure how he got there, what happened. You don't know anything. Well, there was a lot of stuff going on with his ex-wife, who was also his manager. Yeah. So there was just so much, woven together there that had to get unwound, and it was painful and very difficult. So the things that he was finding out were very painful. I got to see those, so there was a part of me that understood or tried to understand why he reacted the way he did.
So all that pain was manifesting.
And it was just, and it was just bubbling.
Yeah.
So he's trying to deal with all that, and at the same time, trying to continue with his career.
Yeah.
And there was such a clash.
In 2013, Randy's career was beginning to bounce back. He'd gotten himself into a much better state, physically, mentally, and spiritually. He was exercising 3 to 4 hours a day, eating well, reading his Bible each morning. He and Mary were making plans to get married.
How serious did y'all get as a couple before the stroke? Like, where was the relationship at that point?
Hot mama.
What'd he say? Hot mama?
Hot mama. Yep.
I love it. You were all in.
Yep.
Yeah, we were all in by then. I mean, there was no doubt.
Were y'all engaged at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The good thing about it, though, when I guess we'd known each other, our families had known each other. We'd been in touch for 20 years. Yeah. And so I'd already fallen in love with the man, the person that I saw. His kindness, his humility, there was nothing showy about him. And he was always just a great person, just had such character. And for 3 years, we would talk hours and hours and hours. Mm-hmm. And that, I look back on that, and I'm so glad that I did, because I certainly didn't know that 3 years down the road, we'd never be able to talk again, in full sentences. I wish there were more. Yeah. And there may be. We're not ever going to give up hope, no.
Yeah.
So talk about 2013 and the stroke and what exactly?
We were here at the house. We had a meeting here in the dining room, about 8 people from Nashville, to kind of figure out what our game plan was going forward.
Yeah.
Pulling out of those dark days. And so there was a lot of good things on the horizon. There was a lot of hope and reason now, so we need to follow that dream, follow that path. And that night he told me, he said, I don't feel real good. My chest hurts and congestion. So I took him to the emergency room, and they checked his lungs, and he had walking pneumonia, they said. So they gave us all of the breathing treatment and antibiotics and sent us home. Well, the next morning he woke up, and he didn't sleep a wink. He couldn't get air, he couldn't breathe. Took him there to the emergency room again, and they said they x-rayed and both lungs were completely full.
Oh my gosh.
Just overnight. And so they tried to insert, his heart was shutting down, and they tried to place an impella through his groin to assist the heart, and he flatlined.
Wow.
So once we got him back from flatlining, they took him about 2.5, 3 minutes. And I said, we got to get him to the heart hospital, because the heart was just, it was so bad. So we took him to the heart hospital, and by this time it was 5:30 in the morning, our third hospital. He said, we got to put him on ECMO immediately or we're going to lose him, which is life support.
Yeah.
and he was in a coma. And it was, just, everything was happening so fast. After about 24, 48 hours, he said he had viral cardiomyopathy. Wow. It wasn't the lungs, it wasn't pneumonia. So he had gotten a virus, it hit the heart and shut the heart down. Then 72 hours after we had gotten to the heart hospital, he was starting to come out of the coma, and they noticed he had had a massive stroke. Probably through a clot when they brought him back after he flatlined. So then we were dealing with that, and then it led to emergency brain surgery within the next 4 hours. So all of that in 2 days.
And Randy, you don't have any memory of any of those events, do you?
No.
You remember going to the hospital?
Yeah.
That's about it?
Yep.
Wow, it must have been terrifying, Mary.
It was terrifying.
Randy's brain was swelling from the stroke, forcing doctors to remove a large portion of his cranium to relieve the pressure. Doctors stored that part of his skull inside of his abdomen for almost 4 months.
What were the doctors telling you at that point during this surgery? And what were they telling you about his chances, his future?
1% to 2% chance of survival if we did the surgery, and 0 if we didn't. This was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he said by 6 o'clock we'll lose him if we don't try to relieve some of the pressure.
And even if you do relieve it, 1% to 2%?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you react?
When they said he had 1% to 2% chance, all I could think was that's 100% over 0.
Wow.
So those were pretty good odds over, anything over 0 was good at this point. And I knew what a strong person he was, mentally, physically, spiritually. Because by 2013, his heart belonged to God. His heart belonged to Jesus. And he studied his Bible every day and prayed. And he was right in the right place. And I know that when he was laying there in the hospital rooms, even when he couldn't speak, I know that he was having his conversations with God.
Yeah.
And I think they made a deal, right? and my prayer was just please, God, let me have him back in any way, shape, or form.
But did Randy wake up and everything was fine, or was there more?
Well, it took him, they left him in a semi-coma state for a while, and I think until the swelling went down, and I'm sure there was a lot of pain, and then pulled him out of the coma after about 3 or 4 more days. And of course he was wearing a helmet because it was exposed, and IVs everywhere. It was a hard thing to go through, and it was, it's still painful to relive it when you think about the moments and how the minutes seem like years, and and one day after another, just another thing kept going wrong, and I didn't know how much Randy could handle or tolerate. Yeah. But he did it.
At what point, did you actually have to say, "Don't unplug my fiancé"?
Yeah, I did. We were at Vanderbilt now. We were there about 11 days, and he ended up going back into the MICU. He had contracted serratia pseudomonas and a really bad staph. It was only getting worse, and his veins were collapsing, and so they were having to get meds in a different way, and he had chest tubes. It just went on, but after 2 weeks they said, Mary, we need to probably think about letting him go because there's too many things going wrong and not enough right. And I was at that point mad. When they said that, I was angry at them because I didn't feel like they were trying, or I just didn't feel like they'd given it everything they had. Yeah. But he's the one that gave me the answer. I was standing by his bed on this side and held his hand, and I know that he heard me because he responded. I just asked him if he wanted, to keep fighting. Wow. And he squeezed my hand, and like I said, he was in a coma state, semi-coma, I think. And he had a little tear that fell down. Wow. And then the second tear fell, and I got up and I said, okay, baby, we're gonna fight. I love you, I'll be right back. And I went back in that room and I said, He is not ready to give up, and we're not giving up.
Randy spent a total of 6 weeks in a coma and 6 months in the hospital. He'd endured life support, 2 brain surgeries, and 5 tracheostomies. He'd survived several serious infections. Before he was discharged, doctors told Mary that Randy would be bedridden and in and out of hospitals for the rest of his life. That was 7 years ago, and they haven't been back to the hospital once. As Mary likes to say, God doesn't read medical files. The couple spent 2.5 years every day, 4 hours a day, in physical therapy. It took 3 months of intensive speech therapy for Randy to learn how to say the word A. And it wasn't until 18 months later that he learned to say basic things like yup, nope, and bathroom.
Randy, was your mind functioning normally? You just couldn't say the words? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Aphasia, where the brain and the mouth don't connect.
That's got to
called
be
aphasia.
frustrating.
Yep.
So he knows everything. He's very detail-oriented still, but he just can't express himself. And he's done well with it. We've kind of developed our own language.
Yeah.
On March 21st, 2015, Randy and Mary became husband and wife in a secret wedding ceremony close to their ranch, far away from the cameras, with just the pastor and one witness, a longtime friend. Today, the couple spends time raising awareness for viral cardiomyopathy, the condition that led to Randy's stroke, and providing arts and music enrichment for at-risk children through the Randy Travis Foundation.
Randy, did you ever have any doubts about Mary?
No.
No? Should I ask her the same question about you?
Yeah.
Mary,
No
was
doubts.
there ever a moment where you just thought, this is too much, this is too hard?
No, not before the stroke, and certainly not after the stroke. That wasn't an option.
That is awesome.
As long as he was here, I was going to be there. So, he was just going to have to put up with me some more.
For the first time in Randy's life, music took a back seat as he focused on taking one slow, painful baby step per day toward his recovery. But in 2016, he and Mary were surprised to learn that he'd soon be taking one giant step that would cement his legacy in Nashville forever. Randy Travis was being inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame.
How'd y'all find out that was going to happen?
Tony Conway had called us, who was his manager in Nashville, and he said, we need to go over to the CMA office because they're just going to do a little interview where they'll ask you all yes and no answers. So we went over there with Tony, and the lady that was head of the CMAs, they had little chairs set up, so it looked like they were going to do that. And she walked out and she said, you're not really here for an interview. We just wanted to ask you if you would become our newest member of the Country Music Hall of Fame.
That feel good, Randy?
A lot.
It was beautiful. It was amazing.
You didn't see it coming at all?
No, we had no idea. I cried.
Did you?
He cried. That was pretty special. And so then on October was the induction.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when I cried.
On October 17th, 2016, Randy was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame by none other than Garth Brooks.
Name me any artist from any genre in the history of all music that took a format, turned it 180 degrees back to where it came from, and made it bigger than it has ever been before.
Well, and then Randy accepts the award and he breaks out in song.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Once lost, but now I found a right that I see.
I just started bawling. I looked over and Charlie Daniels with that big old hat pulled out a handkerchief that looked like a picnic tablecloth. And he said, I look down and the Oak Ridge boys are down there crying and everybody's wiping tears. And it was so magical.
Wow. Were you nervous, Randy?
Nope.
It was interesting when you put that microphone in his hand, how he just, it becomes second nature.
Yeah, it's like riding a bike.
Yeah.
Made grown men cry.
Oh, it did. It was pretty emotional. And we still talk to people that say, oh, I was there. Or, it was the most magical, most touching, event I've ever seen. So it was just beautiful.
It was Amazing Grace.
Mm-hmm. It was
like
Amazing
that's
Grace.
what made it so emotional, is that it was more than just a song, it was your testimony.
Yeah. It was Amazing Grace.
You stood there because of God's amazing grace.
Mm-hmm. Tender mercies and amazing grace.
Yeah.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.
As we made the 5-hour drive back home to Houston, I reflected on Randy's story. The abuse he experienced as a child, the stubbornness of his youth, the slavery to addiction, the struggle to see anything good in himself. And the more I thought about Randy, the more I kept coming back to John Newton. Because rock bottom is where we all learn how grace works. John Newton learned that after working as a slave in Sierra Leone and nearly losing his life in a storm. Randy Travis learned it after watching his worst moment go viral online and then nearly losing his life in a different kind of storm. Randy told me that since he became a believer, he's never once doubted the amazing grace of God. But how's that possible, given all that he's been through? Because when you look back on your life and you see all the ways you've been a disappointment to God, to the people you love, to your fellow man, and all the ways that you failed in life, but you see that in spite of all that, God never once gave up on you. Your heart is never the same after that. And that's what grace is. God's amazing grace comes as such a surprise that once you see it, you can't unsee it. You once were lost, but now you're found. Blind, but now you see.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
God had another big surprise in store for Randy and Mary. Earlier this year, Nashville icon Charlie Monk was rummaging through an old box when he found a forgotten multi-track recording of a demo that Randy sang back in 1984, before his rise to fame.
The phone rings twice, then it's through.
Fool's Love Affair was released in July of 2020. It's the first single of Randy's career since the stroke robbed the world of his distinctive voice. It's already surpassed 1 million streams online, and it's been one of the most requested songs on country radio stations across the nation.
Our once a week Fool's Love Affair.
I cannot get over what an awesome turn of events Fool's Love Affair is.
Oh,
Isn't that wonderful?
Does that feel good to you, Randy?
a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People want to hear that voice.
Mm-hmm.
People want to be reminded. Randy's still around singing these songs, and it's a good song.
Yep.
I can't believe it stayed in the shadows for so long.
Yep.
Yeah, on the shelf in a box.
What's that been like for you, Mary, to see this song?
Well, it tickles me to death just to hear his voice on the radio, and just to hear his voice again. First time I heard it, I cried again because it's just.
Did you?
Yeah, and though it was recorded in '84, it was still new.
You know, it's one of those things you can chalk up to just being a coincidence, but
No, it's a God thing.
I think y'all have experienced too
Exactly.
many coincidences,
Yeah.
quote unquote, to think that they're accidental.
Yep.
God showers us with little graces here and there. And when we're faithful enough to have our eyes open, we'll see that it's Him. that it's always been him.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for the time today.
Thank you.
Truly grateful.
Thank you for being here.
We'll be including y'all in our prayers.
Yeah. Thank
and,
you.
For your continued recovery.
Yep.
Who knows what God can do.
Yep.
It seems we ought to, but nobody cries. We're two people with nothing to share, but our once a week fool's love affair. It's just a once a week fool's love affair.
This episode of Maybe God was produced by Julie Mirlecoultois and Eric and Giovanna Huffman. Kevin Chin was the sound engineer, and our amazing editors are Shannon Steffen and Justin Mayer. Maybe God's photographer and social media guru is Kat Bruff, and I'd like to extend a very special thanks to Randy Travis's tremendous publicist and newest Maybe God fan, Zach Farnham. Thanks for listening, everybody.